Good evening, and welcome back to Sitting Down a Snowy Laneway podcast. Today's episode is about
the dark origins of Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel is a well-known fairy tale. Before we delve into its disturbing origins, let me recite it to you in the original Australian.
Hansel and Gretel. Once there was a poor woodcutter who had a wife and 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. One day he said to his wife, "Hey, how can we feed the children when we do not even have food for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what," answered the wife, who was only the children's stepmother, as her following statement would support. "We will take them into the woods and then go about our work and leave them there. They'll never find their way home." "What will we do?" Gretel cried, having overheard her stepmother. "I will think of something," Hansel said. At dawn, the stepmother came to wake them. "We are going into the forest to fetch wood," she told them. "Here is some bread for your dinner." All the way into the forest, Hansel dropped crumbs of his bread, not because he was careless, but because he had a crummy plan. When they were deep in the woods, their father said, "Now build a fire and rest while we go chop some wood." The children sat by the fire, and when dinner time came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel. The children waited so long for their father and stepmother to return that they finally fell asleep. When they woke up, it was dark, and they were alone. When the moon rose, they looked for Hansel's path of crumbs, not knowing that the birds, squirrels, and all manner of forest-dwelling animals had eaten every one. Hansel and Gretel were all alone and lost. They wandered for 3 days, frightened and hungry, until they came to a clearing where they saw a house more wonderful than anything they had ever dreamed. It was made of gingerbread. Gretel began to eat a piece of the roof, while Hansel nibbled hungrily at the doorknob. "I wish we had a house just like this one. I wonder how it ever came to be here," Gretel said. All of a sudden, the door opened and an old woman hobbled out. "Do not be afraid," she said. "No harm will come to you. I don't get many visitors out here in the woods." She took the children inside and made them a delicious dinner and gave them 2 cozy beds. Hansel and Gretel crept beneath the sheets and felt as if they were in heaven, unaware just how close they were. The 2 children had not realized that the old woman was really a witch who had built the candy house just to lure children to her. Whenever she captured one, she cooked him and ate him for a great feast. Early the next morning, the old woman grabbed Hansel and locked him in a cage. She woke Gretel and told her to go and cook something to fatten her brother up so she could eat him. Poor Gretel cried and cried, but it was no use. Every morning, the old woman would hobble out to the cage and demand to feel Hansel's finger to see if he was fat enough yet. However, her eyesight was poor, and Hansel tricked her by sticking a bone through the bars. After a few weeks, the witch lost patience and could wait no longer. "Now, Gretel," she said, "fetch water for the cauldron, for fat or thin, I shall eat Hansel up." Tears streamed down Gretel's face as she went to the well. The witch made Gretel fill the kettle and start the fire. "First we bake bread," she said. "Crawl into the oven and see if the fire is hot enough." She meant to close the child in the oven, but Gretel guessed her plan. "Oh, I'd never fit," she said. "You stupid goose," the witch cried. "See? Even I could fit in this thing." Quickly, Gretel gave the witch a push, shoving her right into the oven, slamming the iron door and bolting it shut, because the best ovens have locks on the outside. The children were so happy as the witch writhed and burned in agony. With nothing to fear but fear itself, they looked about the witch's house and found pearls, precious jewels, and gold coins, and a golden egg-laying hen. They filled their pockets and quickly left. They soon came to a river which could not be crossed. But a beautiful duck came and helped the children, one by one, to the other side. They thanked the duck with a gold coin that was as useless to the duck as a locking bolt on an oven door is. The forest there was more familiar, and at last Hansel and Gretel saw their father's house. They rushed to him. When the poor man saw the pearls and jewels and gold coins, he knew all their troubles were over, except for the small matter of getting rid of his kids again.
The end. So, Hansel and Gretel has been popular ever since the brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, published it in 1812, a while ago now. But the story is far older. Being German in origin, it may go as far back as the Great Famine of 1315 in medieval times, when desperate parents would abandon their young children to fend for themselves, or even worse, eat their children to stave off hunger. And this famine, no doubt, planted the seeds of Hansel and Gretel. In the 1600s, 200 years before the brothers Grimm got their hands on it, an Italian poet named Guillaume Battista Bazel wrote about Nanelio and Nanella, two young children whose father, Januccio, remarried a horrible lady after the children's real mother was taken by death. Keep in mind, this would have been written after the Black Plague, another inspirational period for dark fairy tales. The children's evil stepmother did not take fondly to Nanelio and Nanella and had the father get rid of them, out in the woods no less. But, feeling guilty, Januccio had left a trail of scattered ashes from their dead mother to lead them back home. But, is often the case, the wind blew away any trace of the ashes, and with the arrival of pirates and a prince, any more similarity to Hansel and Gretel blows away too. So we have the beginning of the story, children getting abandoned in the woods and unable to find their way back home. As for the hideous witch, in Hansel and Gretel she is unnamed, except in Engelbert Humperdinck's opera version she is called Rosina Leckermore. Translated from German, it means Raisin Sweet Tooth. How cute. At least she's not called Engelbert Humperdinck. Witches go back a long way. In the Bible, the witch of Endor could summon dead spirits. In the Old Testament, she rises up the ghost of Samuel from the abode of the dead. Endor was not home of the forest-dwelling Ewoks, but was rather an ancient Canaanite city in present-day Samaria, I think. But witches expanded to every part of the globe, even to the Globe Theatre for Shakespeare's Scottish play, where three witches coined the phrase, double, double, toil and trouble. They guide the Scottish king to his ultimate destruction. And then there's the Salem witch trials and the Wicked Witch of the West. But what of the old hag lurking in a gingerbread house in the woods, luring children with the promise of candy? Well, she may have been based on a real person. Katharina Charelian was born in 1618 on the outskirts of the dramatic Black Forest. She became popular for her baked cookies, flavored with ginger roots and heaps of sugar, but she became too popular with married man Hans Metzler, who chased her affections to no end. The end came when she couldn't take his stalking and his rummaging through her recipe book any longer, and Katharina closed up her bakery and left town. Furious at her rejection, Hans accused her of witchcraft, and because her cookies were so tasty, the townspeople agreed that only a unity with Satan could have spawned such treats. The angry mob, who assumed they had digested devil cookies, tracked Katharina down, dragged her back to her bakery, and burnt her alive inside her own oven. So perhaps these scattering breadcrumbs of biblical, folklore, and Macbeth, the Scottish play, were the seeds that grew Hansel and Gretel, the great little yarn that parents used to threaten their children into eating their vegetables. Eat your veggies too. Broccoli's good, and carrots, peas, green beans. Stay away from that gingerbread. In fact, just avoid anything with ginger on it. Oh, you don't have to avoid ginger-haired people. I don't want to be racist. Or hairist. Thanks for listening.